Hello, it's Jim Lynn here. Welcome to episode 24 of Mr. Lynn's Workshop. This is the third in our series where we super tune the Lie-Nielsen number 4 smoothing plane, and in this episode we'll reassemble the plane and take some test cuts. I'll be asking the question, was it all worth it? More about that towards the end of the video, but for the meantime, let's prepare the blade. I've got a freshly flattened 1000 grit stone here, and I'm using a mag lock just to get a better grip on the blade, and all my pressure is on that mag lock. Transverse stroke, the blade is 10mm on the stone and 10mm off, and I work my way up and down the length. After re-flattening the stone, I change to a longitudinal stroke. Like I did with the chip breaker, I re-ground the primary bevel to match my own 25° setup. I'm using a straight roller body set at yellow 2 position with the angle registration jig set at yellow 25°. This is my coarse 140 grit diamond plate. I use this for my normal regrinding. It's not particularly fast, so if I wanted to change the bevel angle completely, I'd use something like 40 grit sandpaper. This realignment task took about 10 to 15 minutes, and I know I'm done because I can feel a wire edge. I'm going to work on the secondary bevel now. Now that's 33 degrees, and the easiest way to set that is to use the red 45 position on the registration jig. Also, I need to ensure that the micro bevel knob is in the 12 o'clock position. The secondary bevel is actually a curved edge, so the first step in achieving that is to mark the blade with my marker pen just so that I can check progress. David Charlesworth's preferred method was to use a strip of card to prop up one corner of the blade. Then, with pressure on the corner we're working on, the opposite corner, take 5 light strokes. This will just ensure that the blade doesn't dig into the stone. Even with those 5 strokes, we've already created a triangle on the corner we're working on. On the other corner, the paper's merely just rubbed off the ink. Then it's 25 firm strokes with good pressure on the corner that we're working on. Now you can see I've changed card. The original white card just kind of melted before my very eyes, so I've changed to this slightly thicker card, and even it's not holding up that well. You can see it starting to break up, so more research required in that department. However, the result is good. We've got a nice 15mm long triangular flat on the corner of the blade. Now we just do the same on the other corner, so that's 5 light strokes just to take off the point of the corner, then 25 good firm strokes with pressure on that corner to create a triangular flat. This is what we want, 2 even triangular flats. Now we just need to blend those flats together to make our curved edge. So with a freshly flattened stone, we apply pressure on a point midway between the centre of the blade and the corner, and we take 4 firm strokes. Now you can tell you've done it correctly if a narrow dark track appears on the stone underneath where your finger was. Then you do the same 4 strokes on the equivalent point on the other side of the blade. Notice that we've done no work on the centre of the blade. So now we can see that we've blended our triangular flats into a nice curve, and we've also created a wire edge, so now we know we're ready to polish. Turning the micro bevel knob to the 6 o'clock position will give us our 35° polishing angle. On this freshly flattened 10,000 grit stone, I'm doing 5 easy strokes at each of my 5 pressure points, so that's the 2 corners, the central position and the 2 intermediate positions. As a final blending step, although not strictly necessary, I pull the assembly towards me whilst gently varying the pressure from left to right and right to left. This makes a nice X pattern on the stone. Finishing up now with the ruler trick to create that nice polished back bevel. I've cleaned off the remnants of the marker pen ink with some meths, and now if I hold the blade up to a light source with a straight edge, we can clearly see the curve. Well, I do like that. We're almost done, but the final task we have to do is just to check the flatness of the sole of the body of the plane and also give the sole and the sides a good polish. Now to do that we need to assemble the plane, so let's do that next. I started off by reinstalling the depth of cut adjuster screw. Now the thread's quite tight, so I did have to use the copper wire again to protect it from the mole grips, just to give me sufficient torque to get the screw to go right home. You can also see that I've secured the whole assembly to the bench with a hold fast through a piece of copper wire to protect the casting, and I've got the whole thing sitting on the blade so that the lateral adjustment lever has somewhere to go. This is refitting the depth adjuster yoke. Make sure you get it the right way round before you do this. The little pin was a reasonably good stiff push fit, so I could get it so far in with my fingers, but eventually a little bit of careful persuasion with a hammer and a drift made the pin sit in the correct position. This is the frog adjuster yoke being refitted. Followed by the frog adjuster screw and the frog retaining screws. I set the adjuster screw at an intermediate position for now, and I tightened the tensioning screws so that the little point just pokes into the vertical hole. The frog drops in nicely, getting the prongs of the adjuster yoke into the slot in the adjuster screw. The holes in the body for the tensioning pins line up in an intermediate position on the frog. That's just for now. Now I'm dropping in the tensioning pins, and you can see there's a little slot engraved in them. That should point up the screw, and they are a bit fiddly, but you can adjust them by using a small screwdriver. Here I'm partially tightening the frog tensioning screws just so that I can check the adjuster mechanism works smoothly. Now I can reinstall the adjuster knob, remembering that it's reverse threaded. At this point I tried to reinstall the rear handle with the frog in place, but I couldn't quite get the threaded rod to grip. I think it's in fact a little bit too short, so I decided just to take the frog off and do it the easy way. Having tightened down the threaded rod in the body of the plane and then put the handle on, I realised that the rod didn't protrude enough above the washer in the hole for me to get the brass knob started. So I had to take the handle off and slacken off the threaded rod a bit, and then I could get the knob started and it tightened down fine. But it does seem strange that that threaded rod seems a bit too short. Is it a design flaw, or is it meant to be like that? With the frog reinstalled and tightened, I can drop in a blade and chip breaker assembly. This is a spare chip breaker and blade set that I've got. I'm going to use that for the next stage. I just don't want to risk damaging the edge of the blade and chip breaker that we've just completed fettling. Finally, the front toe is installed, and that's us ready to do our sole flattening. I found some rolls of self-adhesive abrasive film, so I'm going to use that on my granite reference plate and stick it onto the plate diagonally. And I can just get the number 4 in with a decent stroke diagonally. Now I'm expecting the sole of this plane to be pretty flat, so here I'm only really cleaning up the odd scratch and scuff and of course the tarnish. After 3 firm passes along the paper, I inspected the sole to check the result. I can see that the paper's not yet touched a small area towards the rear of the plane, but we've got good scratch patterns around the mouth, and that's the important place. After about 5 minutes work, I've got a good even scratch pattern across the entire sole of the plane. Peel off the 1500 grit paper, clean off the bronze dust with some meths, and stick down some 2500 grit paper. Notice how I'm lifting the plane and taking it back to the start each time rather than just pushing the plane backwards and forwards. This is the best way to ensure flatness. I made a few passes on the sides of the plane as well. Not strictly necessary, I could easily just polish that with the Autosol, but if there's the odd scratch or two that has a slight raised burr, it'll take care of that. Don't forget to smooth all around the edges of the sole as well, again just to take care of the burrs of any nicks that might be there. So this is the result of our work with the 2500 grit paper, a nice even scratch pattern. So now we're sure that the sole is at least dead flat and it's as smooth as it can be in preparation for our final polishing. As you can see, there's a nice satin finish left by the 2500 grit paper, and that's perfectly adequate. That's flat enough, it's smooth enough, the plane would operate really smoothly, particularly if you wax the sole. But I'm kind of going for an aesthetic shine here as best I can, so I'm trying the Autosol first, rubbing it on with a cloth, then rubbing it off with a clean part of the same cloth. Finishing up as always with some of Shane's peacock wax. The wax did seem to take a little bit of the shine off, or it could be that I just didn't buff it for long enough. But now it's time to get this old blade out and put our good blade in, then adjust the plane and get some test cuts. I like this procedure to secure the chip breaker to the blade. I'm always very careful with that nicely sharpened chip breaker edge. And I set the edge of the chip breaker about 1mm or so back from the edge of the blade. Now when you tighten the screw, the whole assembly has a tendency to slip due to the torque of the screw, so pinch it towards the rear and tighten slowly. That's about the right projection. It's only really critical for really difficult woods. Before inserting the blade, I like to check that the lever cap screws reasonably slack. I'll be tightening everything up properly later. Hold the body of the plane so that the surface of the frog is horizontal. Be careful not to ding your freshly sharpened edge against the mouth of the plane. Once the lever cap is in place, we can apply more tension by turning the lever cap screw. Check the alignment of the blade at these 4 points. You can check the tension in the whole system by moving the lateral adjustment lever and the depth adjuster knob. It shouldn't be so tight that it's jerky, but also not so slack that it's sloppy. The first step to set the distance between the front of the mouth and the edge of the blade is to advance the blade so the edge is just proud of the sole. We're going to reduce that gap between the front of the mouth and the edge of the blade by advancing the entire frog forwards. So, having slackened the frog tensioning screws, we advance the frog slowly by turning the frog adjustment screw. With the plane held against a white background, slowly advance the frog until you get the gap you want. Of course, don't forget to tighten the frog tensioning screws when you're done. Well, that's looking good. So finally now we can do some test cuts. I've got here a piece of hard maple, and this surface that I'm marking up for telltale is straight off the saw. Now you normally wouldn't use a number 4 to prepare a rough surface, but this will be a good test. I'm starting by creeping the plane along whilst advancing the blade until it just takes its first bite. Well, now we embark on a voyage of discovery. Is the blade projection too coarse? Is it too fine? How does the plane feel? Well, my first impression is that I think I've got the blade projection too coarse. Although I expect it to skip and jump as it goes over the peaks and troughs of the rough surface, it just feels a bit hard to push. Having retracted the blade a little bit more, now as I push the plane, I'm advancing the blade by smaller increments. Well, these shavings are still a bit too coarse, but we can clearly see that the plane is easily capable of bringing this rough surface closer to smooth. That's better. After 2 or 3 minutes we've got a good surface to work with. After marking up with the telltales again, let's try a single stroke right down the centre of the board. Good, that tells me that I've definitely got a curved blade. However, I feel that clear strip is a little bit too narrow. I think I've sharpened the blade curve a little bit too fast, but that's fine. I can slow that down with different finger pressures and subsequent sharpenings. This clear strip now, the width of that is what it should be like to begin with. If you need to back off the blade by turning the adjuster knob counterclockwise, don't forget to follow up by turning it clockwise just to catch that forward pressure again. Now we're beginning to get some really nice thin shavings. Also, the plane feels really silky to push, almost effortless, and the adjuster mechanism is just a pure joy. It's so smooth and silky, even though I've got the pressure quite tight on that lever cap. Well, this Lie-Nielsen number 4 smoothing plane definitely has no problem at all with this hard maple. Mr. Lie-Nielsen's designed and manufactured a truly excellent tool that works very well straight out the box. And so what have we really done to it? Well, we've only cleaned and polished a few parts, but each of those tiny procedures on each of those small parts, whilst insignificant on their own, add up to something that is greater than the sum of all the parts. And we've taken on an already excellent tool and made it into something that's an absolute joy to use. So the question is, was it worth it? Well, you probably already guessed that I'm going to say yes, an emphatic yes, it definitely was worth it. For instance, let's take the performance controls, that is the lateral adjustment lever and the depth of cut adjuster knob. Those controls, even though they're under quite a lot of tension now, I've put a lot of tension through that lever cap and blade assembly, those controls are silky smooth to operate, velvety. There's no hint of roughness, there's no hint of jerkiness. They're easy to use. The whole system is now a joy to control. So what about the aesthetics, the extra polishing? Well, rough surfaces have a tendency to attract muck and dirt, and more than that, they hold it there. So I think if you start off with a good, clean, polished surface, you're going to find it a lot easier to keep it clean. Now, particularly that lever cap, that had quite a rough finish to start with. It's just a cosmetic finish. I thought it made sense to remove that and polish it up. I'm going to find that a lot easier to keep clean in the future. So yes, all in all, it doesn't take that much longer to improve the aesthetics, the shine, the polish. So I would say do that. I would say go for that. Well, I'm very happy with that. Of course, this procedure works for any of your hand planes, so why not give it a go? And let me know how you get on in the comments. Well, that's it for this episode. So thank you very much for watching, everyone. And I'll see you next time on Mr. Lynn's Workshop.